So we can paint with lots of different techniques on these wooden rounds. And this one here, I have put some white in the middle and the blue over here on the outside, and then just kind of mixed on the actual wooden round to create that sort of whiter tint in the middle, going out to slightly darker on the outside. I'm going to add some stripes on the edge later, so I need to do that coat first and let that dry, and then I'll come back and draw the stripes in, first of all with pencil, and then I'd paint the stripes. For this one here, I have used plates and saucers and cups to draw in my lines. And if you're doing that kind of thing where you have quite a straight line, it's good to have a nice flat brush, and then showing the children that when you come up to a line, you just kind of come very carefully up to the line. Another technique is with a flat brush to push your brush down and then just kind of very slowly and carefully drag it, and the edge of the bristles is on the line, so you can see that that paint hasn't gone on very well, so you need plenty of paint for that. Push down and then just drag the paint brush around, and then you can just kind of fill in the extra spots there if you need to. So you're really working towards having a nice straight sharp line for this kind of design, whereas this one here obviously had no line at all, so it was quite a different technique. So when you're applying a slightly runnier paint, it is a lot easier, especially painting on these textured wooden rounds. So hopefully your paint is reasonably runny. If not, you can always add a little bit of water. And then here for this stripe, I'm just kind of painting in the inside, and then I'm just going to push the paint with my flat brush to meet the other colour, which is still actually wet. So you can do it that way if children are being very, very careful. You can do it this way, and then you can see when I've got the runnier paint, it's also easier to do that line I was showing you before, where you are just dragging the paint, and as soon as it starts dropping the paint, get more paint on your brush, push down the bristles, and use the edge of the brush to form that line. Like that. And then for doing dots, children often like to do dots very quickly, but it's good to show them different ways of making dots that end up really quite perfect. So you can use a stick and straight up and down. You're basically placing the paint. It is a little bit thick, this paint, so you're getting little points sticking up, but that will actually settle down once it's dry. And then showing children that it's like one dip of paint, one dot. One dip of paint, one dot. Because it's very easy for children just to do dot, 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 dot. But if we just slow it down and really think about the spacing in between, the amount of paint, then you can get a really effective dot. You could also do smaller dots if you wanted to, using the point of the skewer. And this might be, you might be able to do 4 dots and then more paint. And again, straight up and down. As soon as you start doing that, then it becomes more like a dash. And then you can also use the back of your paintbrush. Could work. That works well as well. Whoops. I just drizzled some paint there, so we let that dry. If you make a mistake, let it dry, and then we just paint over the top. Looks a little bit like meringues, doesn't it? You could do something that is a little bit more abstract, so maybe choose a few colours that work together well. So I've chosen the blue, purple, and then have a white so that you can make sort of tints of those two colours. So you could just keep it quite limited, or maybe you could introduce another colour at some point. And then just showing how you can work quite organically in a way, where you're just sort of putting paint down, responding to what you see. I'm kind of thinking maybe this is a little bit of a lineal sort of idea, so I've got that in my head that it is going to be lines, and then I'm making tints of the colours, but I'm not mixing it beforehand, so it has that quite painterly feel, and it's quite interesting because it's not completely mixed. I quite like the lines of that wood, so I might sort of accentuate that, and then just kind of patting the brush so that there's quite a lot of paint sitting like that. White bit there looks quite cool. Just going to leave that and not blend it all. So it's quite a different technique really. You can still paint as usual, but you're just leaving interesting combinations. Sometimes it's just sort of patting the paint. Could be become quite dry. And some of that undercoat is coming through. It's quite nice too. And then it could be quite thick and sort of gloopy, which is also quite delicious. So this might end up looking a little bit like an abstract landscape idea, or it just might be quite pattern-like. And then maybe you could introduce something with a bigger brush. And I'm going to just try a little bit of yellow up here, which is a bit radical. And then the white. So instead of mixing up the white and the yellow on the side, you could just work with it on the round. So I'm going to take a little bit of that purple up into the yellow. Take some more white. And we're just creating that colour on the wood. And the texture of the wood through there is quite cool. That little bit of purple, very subtle, it's kind of nice. I might just take up a little bit more. And that does feel a bit like a landscape, like that could be the horizon. And that's okay. Then you need to think about what you do at the bottom to balance it up. Whether it's just getting darker and darker to the bottom, or just more of the same. I don't think you'd repeat the yellow down there, but you could, I guess, do a little bit of a patch of yellow in here, possibly. So you're just kind of experimenting, and then if it doesn't work out very well, you can just let it dry. Start again. Go over the top. Added a little bit of yellow down there and on that side, and added the dark blue, and there's a little bit of white on my brush. And then I've just very gently kind of dragged some of that colour through. So I'm making almost a green, but it's still just using the limited colour palette of the blue, yellow and white, but just in different strengths. So that little bit of green I think is quite nice. To get really straight lines you can use tape. It can be problematic if you do lots of layers first, because then it's hard to know which one is going to come off when. And it's quite good to take the tape off while the paint's still quite wet. But the paint can leak a little bit or kind of seep underneath, especially because you've got quite a textured, uneven surface. So you can see that's happening there. But it's still giving a reasonably straight line. And then you could also let that dry, and then if you wanted to paint another section, you could tape across the dried blue so that you've got a nice line to come up to again from there. Or you could just do a combination, some taped and some just coming up with your brush, depending on the kids. But it is a nice way to get those lines, and I don't think it actually matters if the line's not perfect, because it's just kind of the nature of the wood. It doesn't really matter.